If no one chooses you tonight, then you were never meant to belong here. The words weren't spoken out loud, but they echoed in Elena Whitmore's chest as clearly as if someone had leaned in and whispered them against her ear, soft and final. The great hall of the Night Vale territory shimmered under rows of iron chandeliers, each flame flickering like 100 watchful eyes, casting gold across polished stone floors that stretched farther than a football field. The air carried layers of scent, pine smoke, aged wood, and the sharp, electric tension of unmated wolves gathered under one roof. Elena stood near the far edge of the room, her back straight, her hands loosely clasped in front of her as if she belonged there, even though every instinct in her body told her she didn't. Around her, laughter rose in bursts, light and confident, as if the night had already decided its winners. Silk gowns brushed against tailored suits, and soft voices carried declarations of interest, quiet promises, subtle claims. One by one, names were called, matches made, futures sealed with a simple step forward and a single touch. Elena didn't move. She didn't expect to. Not tonight. Not ever. Her dress was simple, charcoal gray, fitted but unremarkable, chosen to blend rather than stand out. It clung just enough to remind her she had a body, even if the world preferred to pretend she didn't. A passing tray brushed her elbow, and a glass tipped, spilling a thin stream of red wine across the fabric at her hip. The server murmured a distracted apology, already moving on, and the nearby laughter didn't pause. Elena glanced down at the stain, watching it spread slowly, dark against dark, then lifted her chin again as if nothing had happened. She had learned long ago how to disappear without leaving. Across the hall, another pair stepped forward, greeted by a low ripple of approval, and the word claimed moved through the crowd like a quiet current. Elena felt it in her chest, not as pain, but as something duller, heavier, like a weight she had grown used to carrying. She counted her breaths the way she always did when the room felt too full. 1, 2, 3, steady, controlled, invisible. No one looked her way, and that was exactly as expected. Yet something shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imagined, like the moment before a storm when the air changes and no one can quite explain why. The conversations didn't stop, but they softened, edges blunted as attention tilted toward the entrance without anyone openly turning. Elena felt it before she saw anything, a pressure that brushed against her senses, unfamiliar and impossible to ignore. Her shoulders tightened, a faint tremor moving through her hands before she could stop it. She told herself it was nothing, just nerves, just the crowd. But the feeling didn't pass. It deepened. Warmth crept along her spine, not comforting, not painful, just present, undeniable. She shifted her weight, trying to ground herself, to pull her focus back to the floor beneath her shoes, to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Somewhere behind her, a voice laughed lightly. Looks like someone can't handle the atmosphere. Another voice followed, amused, careless. Omega nerves. Elena didn't respond. She didn't turn. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. Still, her vision blurred at the edges, just slightly, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer highway. The chandeliers above seemed brighter, their light sharper, too sharp. She blinked once, twice, trying to clear it, but the room tilted just enough to make her stomach tighten. She drew in a breath, deeper this time, and told herself to stay standing. Just a few more minutes. Just until it was over. Just until she could leave without being noticed. But her body had already begun to betray her. The weight in the air pressed closer, wrapping around her senses in a way she couldn't explain, couldn't fight. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, nails pressing into her palms as if pain might anchor her. It didn't. The sound of the room dulled, voices stretching thin and distant, like they were being pulled away from her. Another step forward somewhere. Another quiet claim. Another future decided. Elena tried to take a step of her own, just one, but the ground didn't feel solid anymore. It shifted under her, subtle but undeniable, and her breath caught. Halfway in her chest. For a single second, everything went still. The light, the sound, even her thoughts. And then the world slipped sideways. The moment the world slipped, Elena did not feel herself fall the way she expected. There was no sharp impact, no cold shock of stone against her skin. Instead, there was warmth. Solid, steady warmth that caught her before gravity could finish its claim. Her body leaned into something unyielding, something that did not move even as the crowd shifted around them. For a second that stretched too long, her senses flickered in and out, like a light struggling to stay on. She became aware of a scent first. It cut through everything else in the room, clean and unmistakable, like winter air just before snowfall, crisp and grounding, layered with something deeper she could not name. It did not overwhelm her. It steadied her. Her fingers tightened instinctively against fabric that was not her own, the texture firm beneath her touch, structured, expensive, real. A low murmur rippled through the nearby crowd, subtle but different from before. It was not laughter. It was not amusement. It was hesitation. Elena could not see their faces, but she felt the shift in the air, the careful distance that formed without being announced. No one stepped closer. No one reached out. She tried to open her eyes, but the effort felt distant, like her body belonged to someone else. The world remained dim. Sound softened into a dull hum that rose and fell around her. Somewhere close, a voice began to speak, then stopped abruptly, as if reconsidering. Another voice followed, quieter, uncertain. Who was that? The question lingered, unanswered. The warmth holding her did not respond. It did not shift. It simply remained, firm and absolute, as if nothing in the room had the authority to question it. Elena's breathing slowed without her permission, matching something steadier than her own rhythm. She did not understand why, but her body responded anyway, tension easing from muscles that had been tight for longer than she could remember. For the first time that night, the weight pressing against her senses did not feel suffocating. It felt distant. The scent deepened as she leaned further into it, her awareness narrowing to that single point of contact. She did not know how long it lasted. Seconds, maybe, or longer. Time no longer moved in a way she could measure. Then the motion came, smooth and controlled. She was lifted, not abruptly, not carelessly, but with a precision that suggested strength held in check. Her feet left the ground, but there was no jolt, no instability. The room shifted again, this time around them, space opening as people stepped aside without being asked. The murmur followed, quieter now, threaded with something sharper. Respect, or fear. Elena could not tell which. She tried again to focus, to pull herself back into awareness, but her thoughts slipped away before she could hold on to them. The chandeliers above blurred into streaks of light as her head tilted slightly, resting against something firm. She heard footsteps then, measured and unhurried, each one landing with quiet certainty against the stone floor. No one blocked the path. No one spoke. Even the music, soft and distant at the edges of the hall, seemed to fade as they moved farther from the center. The scent of the room changed gradually, the layered crowd fading behind them, replaced by cooler air, cleaner, quieter. A door opened somewhere ahead, the sound low and controlled, followed by the faint shift of temperature as they passed through. Elena's fingers loosened their grip without her noticing, her body giving in to the stillness that surrounded her. The last thing she became aware of was the absence of noise. No laughter. No whispers, no expectation, just silence, and the steady presence holding her as if there had never been any question that it would. Then everything slipped into darkness again. Consciousness returned slowly, not as a sudden jolt, but as a quiet unraveling of darkness into light. Elena became aware of softness beneath her first, something far removed from the hard stone floors she had expected. The surface beneath her was smooth, structured, and impossibly comfortable, like it had been designed for someone who never had to earn rest. A faint warmth surrounded her, not overwhelming, just steady. Like the room itself breathed in a controlled rhythm. She did not move immediately. Her body felt heavy, not weak, just distant, as if it needed a moment longer to remember how to belong to her again. The air carried a different scent now. Clean linen, faint cedar, and that same underlying note she had sensed before, the one that had steadied her without explanation. It was stronger here, settled into the space as if it belonged to the walls themselves. Her fingers shifted slightly against the surface beneath her, brushing fabric that was finer than anything she owned, tightly woven and cool against her skin. The movement pulled her further into awareness. Her eyelids fluttered once, then again, the light behind them soft but persistent. When she finally opened her eyes, the ceiling above her came into focus slowly, framed in dark wood beams that stretched across a space far larger than any room she had ever stepped into willingly. The light was low, filtered through tall windows draped in heavy curtains that allowed only a muted glow to pass through. It was quiet. Too quiet. Not the distant hum of a gathering, not the layered noise of voices and footsteps, but a stillness that felt deliberate, controlled. Elena drew in a careful breath, testing the space around her. Her chest rose and fell evenly, no longer fighting the pressure that had overwhelmed her before. She turned her head slightly, the movement slow but deliberate, and the rest of the room revealed itself in fragments. Dark furnishings, clean lines, everything placed with intention, nothing unnecessary, nothing out of place. It was not just a room. It was a space that belonged to someone who expected control over everything within it. Her gaze shifted to the side, and that was when she realized the scale of where she was. The bed alone was larger than anything she had ever seen outside of formal estates. The frame carved from dark wood, the sheets immaculate, untouched except for where she lay. A quiet realization settled in her chest. Not panic. Not yet, just awareness. This was not a guest room. This was not a place someone unfamiliar would be brought without reason. Elena pushed herself up slowly, her muscles responding without resistance now, though her balance felt slightly delayed, as if she were still catching up to herself. The fabric of her dress had been smoothed, the stain at her hip faint but still there, a reminder that what had happened was not imagined. She swung her feet over the side of the bed, the floor beneath them cool and solid, grounding in a way she needed. For a moment, she simply sat there, hands resting lightly at her sides, taking in the silence. No footsteps approached. No voices called out. No explanation came. The absence of it all pressed in just enough to make her aware of how alone she was in a place she did not understand. Her gaze drifted toward the far end of the room where a set of tall windows stood partially open, the curtains shifting almost imperceptibly with the movement of air. Beyond them, the faint outline of the territory stretched into darkness, distant lights scattered like quiet stars across the land. Elena stood carefully, her posture straightening instinctively as if she needed to remind herself who she was, even here. Even now. She took a single step forward, then another, the room remaining silent in response. The scent lingered around her, stronger near the center, unmistakable now. It was not just present. It belonged. A subtle awareness crept into her thoughts, slow and steady, connecting fragments she had not allowed herself to consider before. The way the crowd had shifted, the way no one had stepped closer, the way she had been carried without question, without resistance from anyone. Her breath slowed as the realization edged closer, not fully formed, but impossible to ignore. This was not a place anyone could simply enter. This was not a room anyone could claim without consequence. Elena's fingers curled slightly at her sides as she turned toward the door, her senses sharpening despite the calm that surrounded her. Somewhere beyond that door, answers waited. And something told her, without explanation, that whatever she would find on the other side had already decided everything. The door did not open when Elena first reached for it, and for a brief second, she wondered if it was locked, if she had been placed here not for rest, but for containment. Her fingers rested against the smooth metal handle, cool and unmoving, until she applied just a little more pressure. It gave without resistance. The quiet click echoed louder than it should have in the stillness of the room, and the door eased open slowly, revealing a corridor beyond that felt just as controlled as the space she had left behind. The hallway stretched out in both directions, lit by low-wall fixtures that cast a steady amber glow across dark stone and polished wood. The air was cooler here, carrying that same scent, stronger now, woven into the structure itself like it had never been anything else. Elena stepped forward, her bare feet silent against the floor, her posture instinctively careful, aware that she was somewhere she did not belong yet could not deny she had been brought here intentionally. The door behind her closed softly on its own, the sound final but not threatening, simply decisive. She paused, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no distant movement. Just the quiet hum of a place that did not need noise to assert its presence. She turned to her right first, following the corridor as it curved slightly, the architecture guiding rather than revealing, every angle deliberate. As she moved, she began to notice the details she had missed before. Framed maps etched into dark panels. Subtle markings carved along the walls, not decorative, but symbolic, each one placed with purpose. This was not just a residence. It was a center of authority. The realization settled deeper with every step. She slowed near an open archway, drawn not by sound, but by something less tangible, a shift in the air that pulled at her senses. Beyond the arch, a larger space opened up, not grand in the way of the ceremonial hall, but commanding in its own right. A long table stood at the center, its surface clear, its presence alone enough to suggest decisions were made there that carried weight far beyond the room itself. Elena did not step inside. She remained at the threshold, her gaze moving carefully, absorbing without intruding. The scent was strongest here. It settled into her lungs with each breath, grounding and unsettling at the same time. It did not feel unfamiliar anymore. That was what unsettled her most. It felt known. She turned away, her heartbeat steady but aware, continuing down the corridor until she reached a set of tall windows that overlooked the grounds below. From this height, she could see more clearly. The territory stretched outward in ordered layers, lights marking paths and structures, everything placed with intention. There was no randomness here, no uncertainty. Whoever ruled this place did not allow for it. A faint sound reached her then, not loud, not abrupt, but enough to break the silence she had grown used to. A door closing somewhere behind her. Elena turned slowly, her senses sharpening instantly. This time, the quiet was different. It was not empty anymore. It held presence. She did not move. She did not call out. She simply waited, her body still but alert, her breath measured as footsteps approached at a pace that did not rush and did not hesitate. They were steady, certain, each one landing with quiet authority against the floor, echoing just enough to make their direction unmistakable. Elena felt it before she saw him. The same pressure from before, the same shift in the air that had wrapped around her in the hall, now closer, more defined. It was not overwhelming. It did not need to be. It simply existed, undeniable. She turned fully as the figure came into view at the far end of the corridor, emerging from shadow into the muted light. For a moment, her mind did not catch up with what she was seeing. Tall, still, composed in a way that made everything around him seem secondary. His presence did not demand attention. It commanded it without effort. The distance between them closed slowly, not rushed, not drawn out, just enough for recognition to begin forming in the space between awareness and certainty. Elena's fingers curled slightly at her sides, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that responded without her permission. The scent was unmistakable now, the same one that had steadied her as she fell, the same one that filled the room she had woken in, the same one that belonged here. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that the silence between them shifted again, no longer empty, but charged with something unspoken. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. And then, finally, he did. His voice was low, controlled, carrying no need to raise itself to be heard. You should not be walking alone in this wing. The words were simple, but they settled into the space with weight, like they carried meaning far beyond what was said. Elena held his gaze, steady despite the awareness rising in her chest, the pieces aligning faster now, the realization no longer distant. She had not been placed here by accident. She had not been carried away by chance. And the man standing in front of her was not a stranger. Not anymore. Elena did not lower her gaze, even as the weight of his presence settled more clearly around her, no longer distant, no longer uncertain, but fully real. Up close, the details sharpened in a way her mind had not been ready for before. His expression was composed, not cold, not warm, simply controlled, like every reaction had already been measured before it ever reached the surface. His eyes held hers without strain, without effort, and there was something in them that made the space between them feel smaller than it actually was. Not threatening, not overwhelming, just undeniable. She drew in a steady breath, grounding herself in the moment, refusing to let the silence dictate her response. I did not realize there were restrictions, she said, her voice calm, even if the awareness beneath it had not settled yet. It was not defiance. It was not submission. It was simply truth. His gaze did not shift, but something in it sharpened slightly, not in reaction to her words, but to the way she held them. "There are always restrictions," he replied, his tone unchanged, quiet but absolute. The words were not a warning. They were a statement of fact. Elena felt the meaning settle, not as something imposed on her, but as something that had always existed whether she had acknowledged it or not. Her fingers relaxed slightly at her sides, the tension easing just enough to let her think clearly again. "Then I suppose I should ask where I am," she said after a brief pause, her voice still steady, though the question carried more weight than the words themselves suggested. He watched her for a moment longer, as if considering how much to answer, how much to leave unspoken. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just deliberate. Finally, he spoke. "You are exactly where you were meant to be brought." The response did not answer her question directly, and yet it answered something deeper, something she had not fully formed into words yet. Elena held his gaze, searching for any sign of uncertainty, any shift that would suggest he was anything less than certain of what he had just said. There was none. The realization settled a little further. This was not coincidence. This was not circumstance. This had been decided the moment she had fallen. Her breath slowed again, matching the steady rhythm that seemed to exist around him. The same rhythm she had felt when everything else had faded. "You brought me here," she said, not as a question, but as confirmation. His expression did not change, but the silence that followed felt different this time, less guarded, more settled. "You collapsed," he said simply. "I did not allow you to fall." The words were straightforward, but something in them carried a quiet finality, as if there had never been any other possible outcome. Elena felt that again, that subtle shift inside her chest, not discomfort, not fear, but recognition of something she could not explain. Her mind reached for logic, for structure, for something familiar to hold on to, but the pieces did not align the way they should have. Instead, they formed something new, something that did not fit into anything she had known before. She glanced briefly past him, down the corridor he had come from, noting the absence of anyone else, the complete lack of interruption. "No one tried to stop you," she said softly, more to herself than to him. His gaze followed the direction of her glance for a fraction of a second before returning to her. "No one here would," he replied. The certainty in his voice was not arrogance. It was fact. Elena felt the implication settle fully this time, no longer something she could ignore or delay. Her attention returned to him completely, her posture straightening instinctively as the last pieces began to align. The hall, the silence, the way the crowd had shifted without question, the way she had been carried without a single voice raised in protest, the room she had woken in, the space she stood in now. All of it pointed to one conclusion, one that her mind had resisted forming until this moment. Her fingers curled slightly once more, not in tension, but in acknowledgement. "This is not just a residence," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight of the realization. "And you are not just someone who happened to be there." He did not answer immediately, but this time, the silence felt like confirmation in itself. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same calm authority, but now there was something else beneath it, something quieter, something that did not need to be named to be understood. "No," he said, "just one word. Nothing more." But it was enough. Elena held his gaze, the truth settling fully now, no longer distant, no longer uncertain. The man standing in front of her was not simply powerful. He was the center of everything she had just walked through, everything she had just begun to understand. And somehow, without permission, without warning, she had been brought directly into his world. The silence that followed did not press against Elena the way it had before. It settled instead, like something that had already decided its place and no longer needed to prove it. She felt it in the way the air held steady, in the way nothing around them shifted or interrupted what was unfolding between them. For the first time since she had woken, she understood that this quiet was not empty. It was controlled. Her gaze did not leave his, even as the realization anchored itself fully in her thoughts. "Then I should not be here," she said, the words calm but unmistakably direct. It was not fear speaking. It was clarity, the kind that came when something crossed a line she had never imagined herself approaching. His expression did not change, but there was a pause this time, subtle but deliberate, as if her words had not surprised him, only confirmed something he had already considered. "You are already here," he replied, his voice even, not dismissing her statement, but not agreeing with it either. Elena felt the difference immediately. He was not correcting her. He was redirecting the idea itself. Her fingers loosened at her sides, the tension shifting into something sharper, more focused. "That does not answer the question of whether I should remain," she said, holding her ground, her tone steady despite the awareness that she was standing in front of someone no one else would question so directly. The corridor remained still, the distance between them unchanged, but the space felt different now, more defined, as if the line between them had become clearer. He studied her for a moment, not with impatience, not with irritation, but with a kind of attention that made it impossible to look away. It was not the way someone looked at a stranger. It was the way someone assessed something they had already chosen to engage with. "You believe this is a place you can leave without consequence," he said finally, his voice lower, not in volume, but in weight. Elena did not answer immediately. She considered the words, the way they were framed, the meaning beneath them. It was not a threat. It was not a warning meant to intimidate. It was a statement rooted in the structure of the world she had just stepped into. Her breath slowed again, her mind aligning with the reality in front of her rather than the assumptions she had carried in. "I believe I was brought here without being asked," she said, choosing each word carefully. "That suggests I was not expected to decide anything." The silence that followed was not empty. It held something sharper now, something that moved just beneath the surface of what was being said. He did not step closer, but the presence around him shifted, not expanding, not pressing, just becoming more defined. "You were not asked," he confirmed, "because you were not meant to refuse." The words settled between them, not harsh, not forceful, but absolute in a way that made them impossible to ignore. Elena felt the meaning fully this time, not as something directed at her personally, but as something that extended far beyond her. This was not about her choice alone. This was about a system, a structure, a reality where certain moments did not wait for permission. Her gaze did not waver, even as the weight of that understanding settled deeper. "And if I do?" she asked quietly, not challenging, but clarifying. His eyes held hers, steady, unwavering, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something beneath the surface, not visible to anyone who was not looking directly at it, but there. Not anger, not amusement, something closer to interest. "Then you would be the first to try," he said. The response was calm, almost neutral, but it carried a meaning that did not need to be explained. Elena felt a faint shift in her chest, not uncertainty, not fear, but recognition of the line she stood on. She had never been someone who commanded attention. She had never been someone whose choices altered the structure of anything beyond her own small world. And yet, standing here, in this place, in front of him, that assumption no longer held the same weight. Her fingers relaxed completely now, the tension gone, replaced by something steadier. She understood the situation for what it was. Not a trap, not a mistake. A moment, one that had already begun before she was aware of it. "Then I suppose I should understand what it is I am being asked to remain for," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less certain. He watched her for a long second, the silence stretching just enough to hold the weight of what came next. Then, finally, he answered, his voice as controlled as ever, but carrying something that settled deeper than anything he had said before. "You are not being asked to remain," he said. A brief pause followed, not for effect, but because it did not need to be rushed. "You are already part of what you do not yet understand." The words did not explain everything. They were not meant to, but they shifted something fundamental in the space between them, something that could not be undone simply by stepping away. Elena held his gaze, the meaning unfolding slowly, steadily, and for the first time since she had woken, she understood that leaving was not as simple as walking back through the door she had entered. Something had already changed. Elena did not look away, even as his words settled into something that could not be easily undone, something that did not leave space for simple answers or quick escape. The corridor seemed quieter now, not because anything had changed, but because her awareness had shifted to match it. She could feel the weight of what he had said, not pressing down, but surrounding her, steady and inescapable. For a moment, she said nothing, not out of hesitation, but because there was nothing immediate to say that would not feel incomplete. Her thoughts moved carefully, aligning with the reality she was beginning to understand. "Then I need to know what that means," she said finally, her voice even, grounded in the same calm she had held on to since waking. It was not a demand. It was not a plea. It was a necessity. He watched her, that same measured attention in his gaze, as if he had expected this exact response. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it carried something different, something closer to consideration. He did not turn away. He did not dismiss the question, but neither did he answer it immediately. "Understanding comes after recognition," he said at last, his tone unchanged, steady in a way that made it clear the order of things was not negotiable. Elena felt a slight shift in her chest at the phrasing, not discomfort, but a quiet realization that he was not speaking in general terms. He was speaking about her, about what she had not yet fully acknowledged. Her fingers moved slightly at her sides, not tense, just aware. "And what exactly am I supposed to recognize?" she asked, her voice softer now, not weaker, just more precise. The corridor remained still, the distance between them unchanged, but the space felt more defined with every word exchanged. He did not step closer, but the sense of him filled the space in a way that made proximity feel irrelevant. "You felt it before you understood it," he said, watching her closely, not searching for reaction, but observing what was already there. In the hall, the memory surfaced instantly, not as a distant recollection, but as something her body remembered more clearly than her mind had allowed. The pressure in the air, the shift in her senses, the way everything had narrowed until there was only one point of focus. Elena drew in a slow breath, the realization threading itself more tightly through her awareness. "That was not just the crowd," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. He did not respond right away, but the silence felt like confirmation. "No," he said after a moment. Just one word again, enough to anchor what she had already begun to understand. Elena's gaze lowered briefly, not in submission, but in thought, her mind moving through the fragments that had not made sense before. The scent, the steadiness that had replaced the overwhelming pressure, the way her body had responded without permission, without logic. She lifted her gaze again, meeting his without hesitation. "And you expect me to accept that without question," she said, not dismissing the idea, but testing the boundaries of it. His expression remained composed, but there was that same subtle shift beneath it, something that suggested her response did not fall outside of what he had anticipated. "I expect you to recognize what is already there," he replied. "Acceptance is not something I require." The distinction was clear. It was not about convincing her. It was not about forcing agreement. It was about something that existed whether she acknowledged it or not. Elena felt that settle more deeply than anything else he had said. Her breath steadied, her thoughts aligning with a clarity that had not been available to her before. This was not a situation she could navigate the way she had navigated everything else in her life. There was no fading into the background here, no remaining unnoticed. Her presence had already been defined the moment she had been brought into this space. "And if I choose not to act on it," she said, her voice calm, deliberate, testing the final edge of what she could control. He held her gaze, unwavering, the silence stretching just long enough to make the answer matter. "Then it will not change what it is," he said. There was no challenge in his tone, no expectation of defiance, just certainty. Elena felt something shift inside her again, not sharply, not suddenly, but steadily, like a door she had not known existed beginning to open. It was not forced. It was not demanded. It was simply there, waiting for her to step into it or remain where she was. Her fingers relaxed completely, the last trace of tension gone, replaced by something quieter, something more grounded. She understood now that this was not about being brought somewhere she did not belong. It was about being placed somewhere she had not known she was connected to. Her gaze remained steady, her posture unchanged, but the awareness behind it had deepened. "Then I suppose the question is not whether I leave," she said slowly, her voice measured, certain. "But what happens if I stay?" He did not answer immediately, but this time, the silence did not feel like distance. It felt like something waiting. And for the first time since she had woken, Elena did not feel like she was standing outside of it. She felt like she was already inside. He did not answer her question right away, and this time the silence felt different from all the others that had come before it. It was not measured to guide her, not held to test her, but something quieter, something that existed because the answer itself did not need urgency. Elena felt it in the way the air remained steady, in the way his presence did not shift or press forward, as if whatever came next would not be forced into the moment, but allowed to settle into it. She did not rush to fill the space either. For the first time since she had opened her eyes in that unfamiliar room, she allowed herself to simply stand there without trying to define the outcome, without trying to anchor herself to what she had known before. The corridor stretched behind him, unchanged, but it no longer felt like a path she had walked into by accident. It felt like a threshold she had already crossed. "What happens if you stay?" he repeated finally, his voice low, almost reflective, as if he were not just answering her, but acknowledging the weight of the question itself. Elena did not move, her gaze steady, waiting, not for permission, but for clarity. He took a slow step forward then, not closing the distance completely, but enough that the shift in proximity became noticeable, enough that the space between them no longer felt neutral. It was not invasive. It was intentional. "Then everything that was already in motion continues," he said, his tone even, but carrying something deeper beneath it, something that did not need to be emphasized to be understood. Elena felt her breath steady again, not out of control, but aligning with something she could not name. "And if I had not stayed?" she asked quietly, not because she expected a different answer, but because she needed to understand the edges of it. His gaze held hers, unwavering, the same calm certainty present as before. "You would still be part of it," he said. The words settled without resistance, without contradiction. There was no alternative outcome in the way he spoke, no path that led to something entirely separate. Elena felt that realization fully now, not as something imposed on her, but as something she had already stepped into without knowing. Her fingers shifted slightly, brushing against the fabric of her dress, grounding herself in the present moment even as her thoughts moved beyond it. "So there is no version of this where I return to what I was before," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less certain. He did not hesitate this time. "No," he said simply. The finality in that single word did not feel harsh. It felt honest. Elena let out a slow breath, not heavy, not burdened, just released. The absence of denial, the absence of uncertainty, left no space for hesitation. She understood now that whatever this was, it had already begun before she had the chance to question it. Her gaze shifted briefly, not away from him entirely, but enough to take in the corridor again, the structure, the stillness, the quiet authority embedded in every detail. When she looked back at him, something in her expression had changed, not visibly to anyone else, but enough that the tension she had carried before was no longer there. "Then I need to understand what I am walking into," she said, her voice steady, grounded in something deeper than before. He watched her for a moment, that same measured attention, but now there was no pause, no delay. "You are not walking into it," he said. "You are already inside it." The distinction was subtle, but it shifted everything. Elena felt it settle into place, aligning with the awareness she had been building since the moment she had woken. There was no beginning point she could step back to, no line she could uncross. This was not a path ahead of her. It was something she was already standing within. A faint sound moved through the corridor then, distant but present, footsteps approaching from somewhere beyond the turn she had come from earlier. Elena's attention flickered toward it instinctively, her senses sharpening, not out of fear, but awareness. The footsteps slowed as they drew closer, then stopped entirely, just out of view. A pause followed, not uncertain, but deliberate. Whoever stood there had felt the same thing she had in the hall. The same shift, the same presence. Elena did not turn fully, but she did not ignore it either. She could feel the subtle tension in the air, the awareness of another presence held at a distance, waiting. When she looked back at him, he had not moved, but something in the atmosphere around him had settled more firmly, not expanding, not pressing, just becoming undeniable. The footsteps did not continue. The presence beyond the corridor remained where it was, unmoving, as if crossing into this space required more than just proximity. Elena understood without needing to be told. This was not just his space. It was a boundary, one that others recognized without question. Her fingers relaxed once more, the last remnants of uncertainty gone, replaced by something steadier, something quieter. She did not step back. She did not move away. Instead, She remained exactly where she was, her gaze meeting his again, no longer searching for answers she could not yet have, but acknowledging what was already clear. Whatever this was, whatever had begun the moment she had fallen, it had already placed her somewhere she could not pretend to leave. And for the first time, that realization did not feel like something to resist. It felt like something waiting for her to understand it fully. The presence lingering at the edge of the corridor did not leave, but it did not move forward either, and that alone told Elena more than any explanation could have. Whoever stood beyond that unseen line understood something she was only beginning to grasp, that there were boundaries here that were not marked by walls or doors, but by something far more absolute. She felt it in the stillness, in the way the air held its shape, in the way even the faintest sound seemed to stop short of crossing into the space where she stood. Her gaze shifted briefly toward the direction of the halted footsteps, not turning fully, just enough to acknowledge what was there, then returned to him without hesitation. He had not looked away, not once, not even when the presence had approached. That alone settled something deeper inside her. This was not a place where interruptions dictated attention. This was a place where everything aligned around a single point, and that point stood directly in front of her. "They are waiting," Elena said quietly, not as an observation, but as something she could feel rather than see. His expression remained unchanged, but the slightest shift in the atmosphere around him confirmed what she already knew. "They will continue to wait," he replied, his voice calm, as if time itself adjusted without resistance to his presence. Elena let that settle, the idea that nothing beyond this moment would proceed unless he allowed it to. It was not dominance in the way she had seen in the hall, loud and obvious. It was quieter, more controlled, and far more complete. Her attention moved back to him fully, the weight of everything she had begun to understand forming into something clearer, something that no longer felt abstract. "You have not told me your name," she said, the words simple, but deliberate. It was not a challenge. It was a step forward, a way of anchoring something that had remained just out of reach. The silence that followed was not long, but it carried significance, not hesitation, but choice. He did not look surprised by the question. If anything, he seemed to have been waiting for it. "Adrian," he said, just his name, nothing more. No title, no explanation. And yet the moment it was spoken, something in the space shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Elena felt it more than she heard it, a quiet recognition threading through her senses, aligning with everything she had felt before she understood it. Adrian. The name did not need anything else attached to it. It carried weight on its own, settled into the corridor like it belonged there as much as the walls themselves. Her breath slowed again, her mind tracing the connection without needing confirmation. She did not repeat it out loud, but she held on to it, letting it settle into place alongside everything else that had begun to form. "And I am meant to understand what that means," she said softly, her voice not uncertain, but aware that names in this place were not simple things. His gaze did not shift, but there was something quieter in it now, something that acknowledged the direction her thoughts were moving. "You already do," he said. Elena felt that more than she questioned it. The way the hall had shifted, the way no one had stepped forward, the way even now, someone stood just out of sight, waiting without crossing into this space. Adrian was not just a name. It was the center of everything she had walked into. She drew in a slow breath, letting it out evenly, her posture settling into something more natural, less guarded. "Then I should not pretend I do not recognize it," she said, not as a concession, but as acceptance of what was already clear. The faintest shift in his expression followed, not a smile, not something easily defined, but enough to register as acknowledgement. "No," he said quietly. The presence at the end of the corridor shifted then, not forward, but back, just enough that the tension eased, as if a silent signal had been given without a word spoken. Elena noticed it immediately, the way the air changed, the way the unseen boundary held firm. She did not look toward it again. She did not need to. Her attention remained where it had been drawn from the beginning. "If I stay," she said, returning to the question that had not yet been fully answered, "what changes for me?" This time, he did not let the silence stretch. "Everything that you thought defined you becomes secondary," he said, his voice steady, but carrying a weight that settled deeper than anything before it. "And everything you have not yet understood begins to matter." The words did not overwhelm her. They did not press against her. They simply aligned with something she had already begun to feel, something that had been present from the moment she had stepped into this place. Elena held his gaze, the meaning unfolding slowly, not all at once, but enough to shift the ground beneath what she had believed about herself. She had spent her life being overlooked, unseen, moving through spaces without leaving an impression. And now, standing here, she understood that this was not a place where she could remain invisible, even if she wanted to. Her fingers relaxed completely at her sides, her breath steady, her thoughts no longer searching for a way out, but beginning to understand what it meant to remain. Then I need to decide who I am in that, she said quietly, not asking for guidance, not asking for permission, but acknowledging the one thing that still belonged to her. Adrian watched her for a long second, and for the first time, the silence that followed did not feel like something that needed to be filled. It felt like something that had already begun. Adrian did not respond immediately, but the silence that followed her words felt different from the ones before it, not measured or testing, but reflective, as if something in what she had said had shifted the shape of the moment itself. He studied her, not as one might observe something uncertain, but as if confirming something that had already begun to take form long before she spoke it aloud. Elena did not look away. For the first time since this had started, she was not trying to understand his world from the outside. She was standing within it, aware that whatever came next would not be explained in ways she had known before. The corridor remained still, the distant presence no longer pressing against the edge of her awareness, but she knew it had not truly gone. It had simply stepped back, waiting, as everything here seemed to do. "You believe that is still a choice," Adrian said finally, his voice low, calm, carrying no challenge, only clarity. Elena felt the words settle, not as something to resist, but as something to examine. Her fingers shifted slightly, brushing against the fabric at her side, grounding herself in the reality of where she stood. "It is the only part that feels like mine," she replied, her tone steady, not defensive, but certain in a way that did not need reinforcement. His gaze remained fixed on her, the same quiet intensity present, but now there was something beneath it, something that acknowledged what she had said rather than dismissing it. "Then hold on to it," he said. The response was unexpected, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they allowed. He was not taking that from her. He was not removing it from the equation. Elena felt a subtle shift inside her chest, not relief, not exactly, but something that steadied her further. "But understand this," he continued, his voice carrying just enough weight to anchor the moment again. "What you choose does not change what you are connected to." The words did not press against her. They aligned with what she had already begun to accept. Elena nodded once, the movement small, but deliberate. She understood that now. This was not about denying or accepting something external. It was about navigating something that already existed within reach. A quiet sound moved through the corridor again, softer this time, as if whoever remained beyond the unseen boundary had shifted position without stepping forward. Elena's attention flickered for only a second before returning to Adrian. She did not need to look to know they were still there. Waiting, watching, not out of curiosity, but out of recognition of something they could not interrupt. "They know," she said quietly, not forming it as a question. Adrian did not turn his head, did not acknowledge the presence directly, but the slight shift in the air around him confirmed it. "They recognize what you have not yet named," he replied. Elena felt that settle deeper than anything else he had said. Not yet named. The phrase lingered in her thoughts, threading through the moments she had experienced since the hall, the way her body had reacted, the way everything had shifted without explanation. She drew in a slow breath, letting it out evenly, her mind no longer resisting the connection, only trying to understand its shape. "And when I do name it," she asked softly, her voice quieter now, but no less steady, "what changes then?" Adrian took a single step closer, not enough to close the distance completely, but enough that the space between them became something more than neutral ground. It was not pressure. It was presence. "Nothing changes," he said. "You simply stop pretending it is something else." The words settled into her with a clarity that did not need explanation. Elena felt it then, not as a sudden realization, but as something that had been building quietly, steadily, waiting for her to stop searching for an alternative. Her fingers relaxed fully at her sides, the last trace of hesitation gone, replaced by something more grounded, more certain. She lifted her gaze slightly, not to challenge him, not to question, but to meet him fully where he stood. "Then I am not here by mistake," she said, her voice calm, even as the meaning of it settled completely into place. Adrian's expression did not change, but there was no need for it to. "No," he said simply. The finality of it did not close anything off. It opened something instead, something that had been waiting beneath every moment since she had been brought here. Elena let the silence settle once more, but this time, it did not feel like something to navigate. It felt like something she had already stepped into. Her gaze remained steady, her posture unchanged, but the awareness behind it had shifted completely. She was no longer trying to understand if she belonged here. She was beginning to understand what it meant that she already did. And for the first time, that realization did not feel like something imposed on her. It felt like something she was choosing to see clearly. The space between them did not close, yet it no longer felt like distance. It felt defined, like a boundary that had shifted from separation into connection, something that neither of them needed to cross to understand. Elena held his gaze, not searching anymore, not questioning in the way she had before, but seeing, really seeing. The weight of everything he had said did not press against her. It settled into her, steady and undeniable, like something that had always existed just beyond the edges of her awareness. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel unfinished. It felt complete. Then, slowly, Elena took a breath, deeper than the ones before, not because she needed it, but because something inside her had finally aligned enough to allow it. "Then say it," she said quietly, her voice calm, not demanding, but certain. The words did not break the moment. They anchored it. Adrian did not look away. He did not hesitate. But there was a shift, subtle and unmistakable, something in his expression that had not been there before, not visible to anyone who had not been standing exactly where she was. "You already know it," he replied. Elena felt the answer before she could form the thought. It moved through her, not as something new, but as something recognized, something her body had understood long before her mind had allowed it to exist. The hall, the pressure, the way everything had narrowed until there had been only one point of focus. Him. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, not from tension, but from awareness. "Then I want to hear it," she said, softer now, but no less steady. The corridor seemed to hold its breath, the quiet deepening just enough to make the moment stand still. Even the presence beyond the unseen boundary did not shift, as if whatever came next was not meant to be interrupted, not even by distance. Adrian stepped closer then, this time closing the space between them enough that proximity was no longer abstract. It was real, not overwhelming, not intrusive, just present in a way that made everything else fall into the background. Elena did not step back. She did not move at all. Her gaze remained locked with his, steady, unwavering, even as the awareness in her chest sharpened into something undeniable. When he spoke, his voice did not rise. It did not need to. It carried through the space with quiet certainty, settling into her as if it had always belonged there. "You felt the bond before you understood it," he said. The words did not echo. They did not need repetition. Elena felt them align with everything she had experienced, every moment that had not made sense until now. The warmth that had steadied her. The pull she had not been able to resist. The way her body had responded without permission. Her breath slowed again, not because she forced it, but because something deeper had taken over the rhythm. "It does not ask," he continued, his voice still calm, still controlled. "It recognizes." Elena's eyes did not leave his, even as the meaning settled fully, not as a possibility, not as a theory, but as truth. Something inside her shifted, not breaking, not changing, but revealing itself, like a door that had always been there finally opening. "And once it does," he said, the words quieter now, not weaker, but closer, "it does not disappear simply because you wish it had not happened." Elena let out a slow breath, the last resistance she had not even known she was holding slipping away with it. She understood now. Not completely, not in every detail, but enough that denying it no longer made sense. "Then I did not just collapse," she said, her voice steady, grounded in something deeper than before. Adrian's gaze held hers, unwavering, and for the first time, there was no distance left in what he allowed her to see. "No," he said. The single word carried more than confirmation. It carried recognition. Elena felt it settle into place, the final piece aligning with everything else. She had not been overwhelmed by the crowd. She had not simply been weak in that moment. Her body had responded to something real, something specific, something that had been waiting for that exact moment to reveal itself. Her fingers relaxed completely, her posture steady, her awareness no longer divided between doubt and understanding. "Then this was always going to happen," she said softly. Adrian did not look away. He did not soften the truth. "Yes," he answered. The certainty in his voice did not close anything off. It opened something instead, something that had already begun the moment she had stepped into that hall. Elena held his gaze, the weight of it no longer unfamiliar, no longer something she needed to brace against. It felt right. Not easy, not simple, but right in a way she could not explain and no longer needed to. And for the first time since she had woken, she did not feel like she was trying to understand something beyond her. She felt like she was finally standing inside something that had been waiting for her all along. Elena did not step back when the truth settled fully between them, and that alone changed something fundamental in the space they shared. The corridor did not feel like a place she had wandered into anymore. It felt like a point of arrival. Her breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged, but everything beneath it had shifted into alignment with something deeper, something she could no longer deny or pretend not to recognize. She had spent her life being overlooked, moving through spaces without leaving an imprint. But standing here, she understood that this moment had already rewritten that pattern in a way she could not reverse. Adrian did not move away. He did not lessen the presence that surrounded him, and he did not soften what had been revealed. He simply remained, as if allowing her to stand in the reality of it without interference. That, more than anything, steadied her. "Then this changes more than just where I am," she said quietly, her voice not uncertain, but thoughtful, grounded in the understanding that had finally taken hold. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on her, not searching, not questioning, but acknowledging. "It changes how you are seen," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight far beyond the surface. Elena felt that immediately, not as something new, but as something that had already begun before she had fully understood it. The hall, the way the crowd had shifted, the way no one had stepped forward, the way even now, someone waited at the edge of this space without crossing it. She had not been invisible in that moment. She had been recognized. Her fingers moved slightly at her sides, not from tension, but from awareness. "And they will know," she said, not as a question, but as a realization forming into certainty. Adrian did not hesitate. "They already do," he replied. Elena felt the truth of that settle fully, not as something to fear, but as something to understand. This was not a secret that could be contained within a single room or a single moment. It was something that existed within a structure, a system that responded to it without needing explanation. Her gaze drifted briefly toward the corridor behind him, where the unseen presence still lingered beyond the boundary she had begun to understand. She did not need to see them to know they were there, aware, waiting, recognizing something she had only just named. When her attention returned to Adrian, there was no hesitation left in it. "Then I will not have the option to remain unnoticed," she said, her voice steady, not resisting the idea, but accepting it for what it was. Adrian's expression remained composed, but there was a subtle shift beneath it, something that acknowledged the clarity of her words. "No," he said, "that is no longer available to you." The finality of it did not feel restrictive. It felt defining. Elena let out a slow breath, not weighed down, but grounded more firmly than she had been before. She understood now that this was not about losing something. It was about stepping into something she had never been given the space to consider. Her posture straightened slightly, not out of formality, but out of instinct, as if her body had already begun to adjust to the shift in how she existed within this world. "Then I need to understand how to stand in that," she said, her voice calm, deliberate, not asking for instruction, but acknowledging the reality she had stepped into. Adrian watched her for a long moment, the silence between them no longer empty, but full of something unspoken, something that did not need to be explained to be understood. "You will not be expected to become something you are not," he said finally. The words were not reassurance. They were clarity. Elena felt that settle more deeply than anything else he had said. She was not being reshaped. She was being revealed. The difference mattered. Her gaze held his, steady and clear, the last fragments of uncertainty no longer present. But I will be expected to be seen, she said. Adrian inclined his head slightly, a subtle acknowledgement, not of agreement, but of understanding. Yes, he said. The quiet certainty in that single word carried more weight than anything else. Elena felt it settle fully, not pressing against her, but aligning with something she had already begun to accept. Being seen was not something she had ever been given. It was something she had learned to avoid, to move around, to exist without. And now, it was no longer optional. Her fingers relaxed once more, her breath even, her thoughts no longer searching for a way around what was in front of her. She did not step away. She did not turn back toward the room she had woken in. Instead, she remained exactly where she was, her gaze steady, her presence no longer something that could fade into the background even if she tried. Then I will not pretend otherwise, she said quietly, her voice firm in a way that did not need to be raised. Adrian did not respond immediately, but the silence that followed did not feel like distance. It felt like acknowledgement. And in that moment, Elena understood something else, something quieter, but just as certain. This was not just a shift in how others would see her. It was a shift in how she would allow herself to exist. And for the first time, she did not feel the need to make herself smaller to fit into the space around her. She felt like the space itself had already made room for her to stand exactly as she was. The corridor did not change, yet everything within it felt different now, as if something unseen had settled into place the moment Elena stopped resisting what she had become part of. The quiet no longer pressed at the edges of her awareness. It held her, steady and grounded, like the space itself acknowledged her presence in a way it had not before. She stood without shifting, without the instinct to step back or make herself smaller, and that alone marked the difference between who she had been when she entered and who she was. Now, Adrian remained where he was, close enough that the space between them no longer felt like distance, but not so close that it overwhelmed. It was measured, deliberate, and entirely under his control, yet it did not feel imposed. It felt aligned. Elena let out a slow breath, not heavy, not uncertain, just present, as if her body had finally caught up to the reality her mind had accepted. She glanced once more toward the corridor behind him, toward the unseen presence that had lingered there, and this time, she allowed herself to turn fully. At the far edge, just beyond the boundary she had come to understand, a figure stood partially in shadow, posture straight, unmoving, waiting, not watching out of curiosity, not intruding, simply acknowledging that something within this space had changed. Elena met that distant presence for a brief moment, and she saw it in the way they held themselves, the way they did not step forward, did not speak, did not question. Recognition, not of her as she had been before, but of what she now represented. She did not linger on it. She did not need to. When she turned back to Adrian, there was no hesitation left in her movement, no uncertainty in the way she held his gaze. Then this does not stay between us, she said quietly, not asking, but stating what had already become clear. Adrian's expression did not change, but there was a subtle shift beneath it, something that acknowledged the weight of her understanding. Nothing about this remains contained, he replied. The words settled into the space with quiet finality, not dramatic, not forceful, but absolute. Elena felt that truth fully, not as something that would overwhelm her, but as something she would have to stand within. The idea of being seen no longer felt distant or abstract. It was already happening. Her fingers moved slightly at her sides, not out of tension, but as if grounding herself in the physical reality of the moment. Then they will expect something from me, she said, her voice steady, not resistant, but aware of what came with recognition. Adrian's gaze held hers, unwavering, and for a brief moment, there was something quieter in it, something that did not lessen his authority, but deepened it. They will expect you to stand, he said. The simplicity of the words did not diminish their meaning. Elena understood immediately. Not perform, not prove. Stand. Her posture straightened slightly without conscious effort, not out of obligation, but because something within her responded to the expectation without resistance. She had spent so long trying to remain unnoticed, trying to exist without drawing attention, that the idea of simply standing, without shrinking, without stepping back, felt unfamiliar and yet right. "And if I do not meet that expectation?" she asked, not because she intended to refuse, but because she needed to understand the full shape of what she was stepping into. Adrian did not look away, did not soften the truth, but neither did he turn it into something harsh. "Then you will learn how to," he said. There was no threat in the words, no consequence implied, only certainty. Elena felt that settle into her, steady and grounding. This was not a test she could fail. It was something she would grow into whether she realized it immediately or not. Her breath remained even, her thoughts no longer searching for a way out, but aligning with the path in front of her. She took a single step forward then, not closing the distance completely, but enough to acknowledge the space between them as something she was no longer avoiding. Adrian did not move. He did not need to. The shift was hers, and he allowed it. The corridor remained still, the distant figure unmoving, the entire space holding its quiet, controlled presence as if witnessing the moment without interrupting it. Elena met Adrian's gaze fully, no hesitation.